We have audio. Alright, continue on.
Alright, so like I said, we're doing puzzles today. Very fun topic, just that are evident in almost any kind of game you can think of. To start off today, we'll go over the question of the day, which is how can bad puzzles ruin a game? Which is an open question. If anyone has any examples they can think of. Yeah.
I don't really know any like actual game title off the top of my head, but I remember one time in studio, one of the studio groups made a puzzle of like boxes where you could like push a box into spell a word, right? But they never had you able to like pull the boxes. Like you could never pull boxes, so you could get like trapped in the corner, so you get like soft block.
Oh yeah.
Satchel in Discord says, in all caps, inventory management.
Yeah, very much so. I think that the puzzle type is called Sokoban, which usually has you push a box. Most commonly, they don't give you the ability to pull a box too, but they try to work around that while you're solving the puzzle. And I think most commonly they have a reset ability if you get trapped, but even still, it's not very fun. It's not the most fun kind of puzzle I can agree, certainly. Yeah. Just a puzzle that doesn't feel right, perhaps, or give you have a good solution. Maybe it's a little obtuse. Yeah.
Puzzles that have like a really simple solution, but they're just very tedious to complete.
Yeah.
There's ruins the basic.
Just like giving the player, letting them know what they have to do, but forcing them to just spend hours, maybe grinding, turning the time over and over again. Perhaps like an RPG, which may not seem like a puzzle, but most cases you're trying to figure out what attacks do best against certain enemies, and maybe you have the right attack, but it doesn't do enough damage, and so you spend hours grinding over and over again, or something like that. That's a good example. Yeah.
Puzzles that are far too simple but are overly saturated throughout the game.
Very much so. I'm going to bring up a good example of The Witness here later in the presentation. I think it's a good game, but I can understand everyone else's opinions on the game, how the only puzzle that exists in the game are line puzzles.
What game is this again? I didn't quite hear.
Oh, The Witness?
Okay, The Witness.
Yes. Some popular game from 2016. Like I said, I like it a lot, but it is nothing but line puzzles, so I can agree there.
My least favorite type of puzzles are like those where you already have like a huge map, so you have to go all throughout the entire map just to find the one piece that you need, and it's just long and tedious, and you're most likely gonna die in the mission.
Yeah, perhaps third-person combat games that aren't meant to be as exploratory.
Yeah.
And force you to go through various enemies that were too difficult at one time. Yeah.
The Black Ops 4 Easter eggs. Having to build them.
I'm not familiar with those. Could you elaborate?
So maybe Rumor and two others. Missing. We were talking about my favorite Black Ops zombie smasher, and one of them, and I remember this vividly because me and the veterans were trying to do it for the longest time. A very specific zombies map for Black Ops 4 to get I forget exactly what it was, but you had to do so many steps to just get to it that by the time you did, you were at wave 100 or something, and it's virtually impossible to do.
That's gracious.
Yeah.
And it's obtaining, what was it,
No, but here's a good example of Black Ops 2 where you have to do Victus Easter eggs. Basically, you have to play all 3 maps on the Victus side. Trying to make all pylons for each map to solve the final Easter egg. Which is
I mean, Black Ops 2 is in a way saying that it has to complete every map's Easter eggs just to get the final map's ending thing, which you know.
So Black Ops 2 is different because you have to play Transit and then you have to play Die Rise. And you end up with Barrier.
If anybody else has any examples of bad puzzles ruining a game.
One game is when puzzles, for me at least, aren't paced properly. So if you just get an onslaught of puzzles, even if the individual puzzles aren't that bad. At some point, it just becomes so draining that you just want to put the game down. The game Crosscode, it is a phenomenal game. There's many good things about it, but its dungeons can run for a very long time, to the point where I am just exhausted by the time I get to the end. And of course, each end of the dungeon has this, like, the most elaborate puzzle of the bunch, so it's a very fantastic game. It wore me down.
I think up that alley, I can probably say Bubba Is You, which is a fantastic game that has some pretty fantastic puzzle rules. But they ramp up, I'd say, way too fast, and it feels like there's way too many of them. Very fun game, but very quickly I found myself putting the game down just because I couldn't keep up with the game's rule sets, even if it explains them to you. Yeah. Alright, before all good, I'll move on forward. So, when making a puzzle, you have to think about a couple things. 3 things specifically that you'll need to make the puzzle itself. To start off, you'll need the pieces for the puzzle. They're the elements to solve the said puzzle. They're literally just the things you have when you have the puzzle. Pretty basically, like a jigsaw puzzle, that's the actual pieces. Maybe for Rubik's Cube, that's just the 27 pieces that make up the actual cube itself. The second thing you'll need for a puzzle is a solution. That's the desired puzzle state, usually the end state. That's literally what the puzzle will look like when it's finished, when you've solved it. For a Rubik's Cube, that would be, a fully solved Rubik's Cube. Every single side is a single color. It's pretty obvious. And the third thing you'll need is rule sets. Limitations on how to get from point A to point B. This is the most integral part of a puzzle, and the most fun too. Limitations are what make games fun in the first place. By limiting the player and what they're able to do, usually that puts a game into a specific genre or form of gameplay. That lets the player think outside the box about what they can and can't do and how they can get around those limitations. And that's the same thing for puzzles. So it's pretty straightforward with that. Those 3 things, I would say, are the basis for making any puzzle whatsoever. But it can be tricky. You can't just do that. You have to make a puzzle feel right. A puzzle must follow a hard logic. That way a player who plays a puzzle can understand how to solve the puzzle. For Tetris, it's pretty easy. Every block falls down and will line up with other blocks, and the goal is to make as many lines across the board as possible. And when you present a puzzle, the solution should always be constantly attainable once it is found. That means that every time a player solves a puzzle or goes through the puzzle, they should be able to, play out the puzzle the exact same way every single time. If a Rubik's Cube is given to a person and it is the exact same combination, they should be able to make the exact same moves to get to the final state. If this isn't the case, then that causes problems for the puzzle. If they make the same amount of moves, but it ends up being another, unmatched Rubik's Cube, then something's wrong with the cube. There are exceptions to this, obviously, if there is skill involved. If it's a skill-based puzzle, that's perfectly understandable. That comes down to the player being able to practice enough or in the right way to solve the puzzle. Perhaps like a boss fight in like a character action game, Devil May Cry. That just requires the player to understand the attack patterns, yes, but also how to react to those patterns properly. Use their fingers and their controller in the right way. So that makes sense too. But along with a solution being constantly attainable, you shouldn't have luck be an element in solving the puzzle itself. There are very rare instances where that can be a good thing, but for most cases, going along with this statement, you shouldn't have luck in there because then it becomes weird, and the rules aren't easy to follow. And lastly, one of the other big pieces of making a puzzle is the final piece. That eureka or aha moment the player comes to when they realize the solution for a puzzle. And when implemented properly, most players should experience this. There are many ways that this can affect gameplay, not just mechanic-wise, but also sometimes story-wise. These franchises here, Phoenix Wright, Somnium Files, Zero Escape, and Danganronpa are pretty popular franchises because they implement puzzles not only in their mechanics but also in their story, following the mystery genre. A lot of them have, like I said, mysteries. Letting the player try and figure out while they're solving the actual puzzles. Also figure out who did what thing. Usually there's like a murder involved, and it's figuring out who died, how were they killed, who killed them, that sort of thing. And by keeping the player on pace with that story and solving the puzzle of the story itself, that also lets the player, stick around. You also want to figure out and focus on how a puzzle connects your gameplay. Puzzles can present lots of things to the player as they're solving them. Basic things, they could show off a mechanic of gameplay that you can use later on for other bits of gameplay, other dungeons across the world. They help traverse the world sometimes. Breath of the Wild offers, an array of physics-based mechanics that the player can use in various ways to get across the map faster. If they haven't already opened up a certain area they can just travel to. Opens up new areas. And lots of these, I think you can see in Zelda has good examples of all of these, as Breath of the Wild. But even classic Zeldas, Ocarina of Time offers lots of dungeons that are filled with puzzles, and by solving merely just one puzzle, you already open up so much more with the dungeon. Environmental interaction. There's an example in Ocarina of Time where if you go to, I believe, the future and you learn the Song of Storms from a guy in a windmill, you can go back in time and then teach it to him, creating a bootstrap paradox. And in doing so, that actually changes the level that the water's at in the town, allowing you to access a new area. Also, enemy or NPC interaction. Puzzles can affect greatly how you might be able to talk to certain NPCs or how they might be able to aid you. They may also affect how you're able to defeat enemies or get them to not fight you in the first place. So again, it's a really big intertwining of gameplay and story, but also perhaps how the player experiences the world itself. My specific example here is of, again, Ocarina of Time. This is from the Spirit Dungeon late in the game. Link picks up this mirror shield, and immediately the player can see that they can reflect these light beams coming in through various windows in the dungeon. You're able to use this to reflect light all around the room, maybe vanquish certain enemies, solve some puzzles by getting the beam of light to shine into a sun emblem on the wall and thus opening a new room. But when you get to the end of the dungeon, you're encountered with a boss, these twin witches. You're able to use the mirror shield in this instance as well by reflecting their attacks back at them, hitting the fire witch with an ice blast or the ice witch with a fire blast, that sort of thing. So Zelda really, connects its puzzles and combat pretty well, showing you what the item does in a static environment, and then showing you what it does letting you use it in a more dynamic environment afterwards. Does lead me to this. So this is a puzzle from The Witness, as I mentioned earlier. This is a pretty simple puzzle. The goal of the game is, like I said, to solve these line puzzles, and you just do that by getting from the circle to the end of the line, usually curved. Anybody know a solution to this puzzle?
It's a tough one. Take your time.
This is the very first puzzle in the game when you start it up. Witness has a very unique take on how it shows the player its puzzles. And to sort of jar you for a second, this is another puzzle from the game. Seeing it at first, you might not be sure what it does. You might at first try to just go from the circle and anywhere on the puzzle and try and drag it all the way up to the end up there at the top right. But if you just go around willy-nilly, you might not know what you're doing, and it'll tell you it's wrong, and you're confused. Say, another example, now with vastly different mechanics and clues. Instead of the black and white squares, there's now little black hexagons along the lines and Tetris pieces here and there. Again, it's very confusing at first. And Yet another one. Once again, very different mechanics. Some Tetris pieces, but this time they're tilted kind of, and these pink stars that very distracting. So the Witness doesn't just drop you off into these kinds of puzzles. It does. It's a very open world, and you can do literally any puzzle you want to. But it also takes care to show the player what certain puzzle mechanics do. There's no dialogue in the game whatsoever. There's maybe some audio tapes to tell stories, but nothing relating to gameplay whatsoever. So what the game does is, like I showed with the first little puzzle, it gives the player a very small series of puzzles to see a mechanic for the first time and try and figure out what it does. For that line, obviously, it shows you that this is what the game is. Drag it from left to right. Then it shows another one where it's in an L shape, and you drag it from the circle to the end of the line, and going on from there. Then the world opens up, and you can do just about any puzzle you want to. Yeah. And it does this with various other mechanics too, just as, every single one of these that I've shown, every little piece, the black and white squares, little black hexagons, that sort of stuff, the game makes sure to give the player little bite-sized puzzles to figure out what those things do, and then later on, whenever they come across something more extravagant like this, they're able to figure out maybe these pieces work together in this way, or that way, that sort of thing. And it really takes its time to let the player figure it out for themselves. Yes.
I wouldn't say it's not exactly. I have an example, but it's not exactly a puzzle game. I'm recently playing Mega Man 11, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the interesting things you can see in their level design is they introduce to you not puzzles but enemies in a almost safe, static environment, and then slowly throughout the level add on to those elements to ramp up the difficulty.
Oh yeah.
That's a common technique just for communicating ideas to a player. Just it's for puzzles, it's for anything really. You give them a safe place to try it out, and then you start testing them, putting it in more different and intricate scenarios. Yeah, that's a good eye. Yes.
Dexterity-based puzzles.
Oh, certainly.
Such as? I'm not sure what you mean.
See, like more on like the reflexes of what you've been doing, like
Kind of like rhythm games.
Yeah, rhythm games, or I mentioned earlier, Devil May Cry character action, where you have to just be able to defeat the boss even if you know their attack patterns. Certainly, I mean, puzzles like this and examples like this where the Witness uses are prevalent in any genre of game, even if it's not puzzle games, just to show off what a mechanic does. It's a very basic thing in game design itself, but not everyone thinks about it unless they take a careful look. And The Witness, being a much more open game than most, lets you see that at its bare bones level than most games would.
Yeah, and another example of the game upping the difficulty throughout the puzzles is the game Catherine, where if you don't know what the game is like, it's where you have to kind of create a pyramid or stairs to try to get to the main top. And throughout each of the levels, they're gonna add more obstacles like enemies or ice or any other thing, and you have to kind of get there before the platform falls. And yeah, it can get pretty difficult because you have to think fast about how should I pull out these puzzles, or how should I pull out these blocks so I can get to the top safely and also get there in enough time so I can get a high score. So that's an example again of upping the difficulty with the puzzles.
Okay. So, as I've been mentioning, letting the player figure out the puzzles is a very key part of puzzle games. A bad example for this would be the game The Medium, released a couple years ago, sort of a spiritual successor to Silent Hill. It's not a great game. Its story themes are very problematic, sort of victim blaming throughout the entire game, and its puzzles are also not so great. This is a picture from its infamous conference room puzzle. This involves listening to a person's voice on a phone and figuring out where they were sitting at a conference table. You also have a piece of paper available to you listing names on there, and you can kind of figure out from the person's voice who they're sitting next to. they're complaining about like what this person does in life, or they're like a deadbeat and I can't believe I'm sitting next to them, that sort of thing. But before the player can figure out, oh, this is a puzzle, I should figure out that this person was sitting at this seat because they're sitting next to this person, across from this person, that sort of thing. Before you can even figure that out, that that's happening, the main character already goes, oh, they're sitting across from this person. I should go over there and figure out where else they're sitting next to. It completely undermines the player's ability to solve a puzzle or even recognize that a puzzle's happening. So some elements of bad puzzles that keep the player from figuring it out for themselves might involve giving the player an incomplete or overly complex puzzle. If you had seen, as I presented to you, those witness puzzles before you and force you to solve them, or else you wouldn't leave this room, that would be not very fair and be a bad puzzle game in itself. If you don't explain key mechanics properly, that's pretty bad. There are plenty of games that do that, and like I said with Baba Is You, it does a good job explaining mechanics, but it doesn't always let you feel stuff out, perhaps, or maybe let you wrap your head around certain things. It's really more of a pace problem for that one, I'd say. But and if a puzzle solves it itself for you, as in the medium, it's not very good. And just in general, if the puzzle doesn't give the player proper parameters, pieces, or time to solve the puzzle within, that's not going to feel very fun at all. Moving along to a good example is the video game classic Portal. Very simple series, very simple game, where the main goal is just to open up the door to the next room. It starts you off very simple, by letting the player wait for the door to open. After a certain countdown, a portal opens and they can move on to the next room. In this next room, they're given a cube and a button on the floor. And they're not able to leave until they solve the puzzle. So they decide to put the cube on the button, and it goes on from there. Again, it's a very good example of giving the player a problem in a static environment and then putting them into a dynamic environment, though most often doesn't really give them a more dynamic environment to the second half of the game. Yes?
I just want to say that anyone has Portal, I would suggest listening to the developer commentary.
Ooh.
It's amazing.
I do like those.
Yeah, I'd say that for any Valve game, honestly.
That's true.
They do what they were doing.
And then they stopped doing it.
That's true. That's true. Their unique work environment perhaps works against them these days.
1, 2, hats. They can have the hats for fun.
They've got some people talking about the kinds of things they did for Half-Life Alyx, though, and it's really interesting to look at. Especially, one of them was talking about how they got these bottles of beer, like actually fake fluid simulation stuff. There's no actual simulation; it's just a visual effect that reacts to light. It reacts to you shaking the bottle around, all sorts of things. It is insane.
I kind of want to look at that.
It's also supposed to be a tech demo, or not tech demo, but like a prototype. No, it'd be pretty much proof of concept.
But there is some legitimately impressive stuff in there.
I mean, Portal was a proof of concept. It was successful with flying colors.
I'm saying because they plan on making, I believe, at least 3 with the simulation that they're using for Alyx.
Oh, okay.
Except like much bigger.
Got it. So it's almost like a test run.
Pretty much.
Let's see. So a little bit, like a little tagline to mention with Portal, is that it is a physics-based puzzle, and as I mentioned, luck shouldn't really be a factor in puzzles, otherwise it kind of ruins the experience. But Portal and Portal 2 do it really well. In some instances, it may guide physics in a certain way so that it solves the puzzle properly. In other instances, it's entirely on the player to get like the cube on the button the right way, that sort of thing. So it really gets around that pretty easily. And I've seen some like fan mods, some pretty famous ones out there that don't do it as well as the base game does, and they don't feel right because you know the solution, but you're flying through it and it doesn't work all the time. So it very much needs you. Yeah.
One of the things I think is interesting about Portal is I played the games recently, and I was like, wow, this is like it's such a good game. It's scary. And one of the things I was hearing in the developer commentary is like they would remake levels, move levels around like hundreds of times. They've worked on making sure the flow is consistent. They have people test it to make sure the puzzles make sense. So there's a lot of work that goes into good puzzles.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
One thing I noticed with Portals, or Portal, is that it aged very well. I played it like very, very recently, and I was like, wow, this game is more engaging than some games I've played these days that are like considered AAA titles.
Absolutely.
And it's,
2007.
yeah, and it came out in 2007, and it looks amazing too. Like,
Yeah.
Especially with the new RTS DLC coming out.
it's just like the base game when I played on the website. It just looks amazing, and it's still fun.
And that's the important part.
Yeah. So you could lend that to the source engine of itself, of course, as it was just a little tacked on demo for Half-Life 2 on the Orange Box, which the source engine itself as a whole, and like we were mentioning earlier, Valve's interesting workplace ideas, it really all just culminated together for like this kind of puzzle experience. And it's a really great example. Let's see. So, big question you could be asking, why care about puzzles in general? I'm mentioning it here and there that puzzles and these kinds of rules, exist outside of purely puzzle genre games. They can exist in open world platformers. They can exist in first person shooters. All sorts of games I'm mentioning today. And they're everywhere. They can exist in other base mechanics of very simple games. You can find them in combat. A good example is the SMT series, Shin Megami Tensei series, where in combat, it's turn-based battle, and the main goal is to defeat your opponents, obviously. It's a very tough and grueling game series because of one key thing. Its press-turn combat system, which takes into account player and enemy weaknesses and uses those to your advantage and disadvantage. By hitting an enemy in its weak spot or with an element it's weakest against, you gain an extra turn. And so you can immediately hit them once again. Of course, you only get the one extra turn for every turn. But it really lets you pummel your opponents to the ground. But if you're not careful, they can do the exact same to you. So it's a really fun, dynamic thing, ironically, for a turn-based game. It keeps you on your toes and perhaps keeps you invested because while you're sitting there on a screen that only waits for you to press a button, you're worrying your butt off about whether or not you're going to die, if the opponent can get like 4 more turns in on you before you can even hit it once.
There's also the negotiation system where you can actually not even fight them. You can just recruit them if you say the right things to them. So you have to like figure out, okay, what should I say to this enemy based off their personality.
That's very true too. A sub-mechanic of the combat system, going throughout the entire series. It's perhaps weak in some games. You might not be able to figure out like how to talk to demons correctly. But I'd say in most recent entries, and especially in the Persona series, the most recent games, they do a really good really good job of presenting the player with a recognizable personality for demons and giving you options that would best suit agreeing with them or going against them. And then for exploration, it's also a very key part of. In Legend of Zelda Link Between Worlds, the player is given pretty quickly into the game the ability to merge with walls, making Link a 2D image on walls. This can do a number of things for you. Of course, it lets you solve puzzles in very unique ways in the game, but also lets you traverse the dungeons themselves in very unique ways. As you can see, you wouldn't normally be able to go through a barred window, but as a 2D image on a wall, you can easily slip through the cracks, or move between 2 platforms that have a giant gap between them. You just walk along the wall. It also lets you evade enemies that might be too tough for you, or fight them in unique ways. The final boss of the game has a really fun battle that involves going between the 3D world and the 2D world. It's just a fantastic time throughout. Other examples I might use these, the Undertale and Deltarune games. Obviously, the key part of them is the puzzles in the combat, where you're trying to hit them in the enemy and precisely or avoid them altogether, while trying to dodge their own attacks, which show up in vastly unique ways throughout the entire game. And just like the Persona SMT series, it also has somewhat of a negotiation part of it. Keep letting you avoid battling them altogether. Exploration, I mentioned Breath of the Wild earlier, which allows you various ways to travel across the land. It might seem pretty basic at first, where you just ride a horse or walk along, but you can use one of the abilities which lets you burst up into the air and then glide along, or you could climb on a rock, freeze it with stasis, and then make it explode 5 times, and then go flying across the map. There's really an infinite number of ways, because of course that one's physics-based. Or
You should be a bit careful when including puzzles in non-puzzle games, though. Just make sure you know why people are coming to your game, because it can spice up a battle nicely, but if people aren't expecting a puzzle battle, it can really take them out of the experience. I know Chrono Trigger is a fantastic game, and I wouldn't say it suffers from this, but there is a boss which has a big old screw you, hits all your party members attack, and it's easy to counter it if you know how. Like, it straight up says, hey, it's charging up a big attack, and you can stop it. But you have to talk to a specific NPC in one of the towns to actually know, hey, you can stop him by using this move. So, if you're looking around and doing things, it's perfectly fine, really fun battle. But if not, I've heard of several people just getting walled there. So, make sure you keep your audience in mind. So, if they're not really the reading type, maybe don't hide a important hint in some random NPC in the middle of nowhere.
yeah, I'd say like Zelda 2 suffers the most from that.
Yes.
I kind of one of the examples would be, I'm a Sonic fan. Really like Sonic. Really like Sonic Mania. But one of the most jarring boss battles in there is you play for the first level of the game, Green Hill Zone. It's all nice. You get the Chemical Plant Zone. It's still fast paced, like platforming. And then the last boss fight of that zone is a Toyo Pop game. It's a Tetris essentially. So they go from platforming to playing Tetris, and I'm like, okay, cool, call that, but very jarring to your audience.
Yeah.
To their credit, they made it so it's not a hard wall. Basically, as long as you don't actively die, Robotnik will play so horribly he dies on his own.
Yeah, but
it's still very jarring.
Yeah, I understand. It's not hard, but at the same time, it's like you literally run into the battle, and it's like, stop. Now it's time to play a puzzle game.
Yeah, I'd say I also appreciate the reference to like Dr. Robotnik's Game Machine, but when you mention it that way, it is very jarring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to say, has anyone played the original God of War games? You know the puzzles from those?
Someone actually mentioned that in the Discord.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh.
They're a pain. Especially since the game doesn't tell you how to actually beat the puzzles, you have to look online. Especially.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, the original God of War puzzles are just infamous for being bad.
That's just very fair at the time. Perhaps a developer not used to the genre or a new genre versioning forth.
Yeah. It's extra funny considering the creator got mad at Metroid.
Yeah.
Oh wait, yeah, I remember.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because he got mad that Metroid had puzzles in it, and
He got stuck in the world was most difficult to get stuck in room. And then when he tried to double down, it got repeatedly. He tried to go, that's like, how was I supposed to know this room progressed? There's so many other rooms you can go to. And he just proved that the game blocks off all of them, so you physically cannot get stuck.
So to end off our little discussion, I thought I'd give you the potential to practice puzzle making. Just a little thing if you'd like to. have a challenge of getting this guy up onto that ledge. You'd like to make a puzzle really quickly, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Just like think up some way to get him from point A to point B up there. It could be anything. You don't even have to have like a really descriptive, like, oh, these are the rules of the puzzle sort of thing. Maybe just an idea of a puzzle. Maybe he fights enemies in a specific way, or hops on them to get up there, or maybe he pushes some stairs. Just if you like to, we give you 5 or 10 minutes to think up something. Yeah.
Excuse me. So you're saying the guy has to find a way to get on top of there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, I'm not sure if you saw, but did you see Satchel Link, the Looker in Steam? Have you played that?
I've played that one. That one's really good.
I've got an idea.
Sure.
So I'm thinking like, there's sort of a platform, and there's like a lever right near the guy. But the thing is, like, you can't pull the lever and like get on the platform at the same time. So it's like it can't do much. But then like if you look closer at the room's kind of set up weird, and it turns out there's like a whole like Rube Goldberg device set up in the dungeon room, and you have to like push buttons, pull levers, and like just whatever you can do to kind of get it to a point where there's like a ball rolling or something, and it rolls, and then it falls onto the lever while you're on the platform and you get up there.
Ooh, that's good. Yeah. Yeah.
What I was thinking was maybe it's a mechanic where there's no levers, there's no like kind of jumping, but essentially you can almost go into like you can make the man flip into the reverse, which swaps gravity, so he can just walk under there, drop there, flip again, and he's on top of the platform.
Yeah.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah.
So I'm imagining it as less two-dimensional, more three-dimensional. Basically, the guy can walk past that platform, and then behind it is a set of stairs that he can walk up.
It's pretty fair.
Perspective puzzle.
Teaches the user not to always leave everything in black and white.
I think that's good. It might be a good like first example or early puzzle for a game to show you, hey, there's a lot more than you realize.
Yeah.
What was an optical illusion puzzle? Like,
It's a very popular puzzle type.
That's what I say.
I was gonna say that like you move at a certain angle and it will line up with the floor, so that you could then walk onto it.
Yeah, I was thinking like maybe it's like just far away or something. It wasn't actually perfect pairing.
Yeah.
Like you're able to rotate the entire level, which will play into later levels, which is someone did it. I forget. It was a long time ago, like 5, 7 maybe years ago.
What was the game?
I can't remember off the top of my head. It was something to do with like a mountain and like going through like a large castle, and you were trying to
arrows there kind of seem like something that's not a part of the game of the character can interact with. But what if you could grab onto the arrows, point it towards the platform, the arrow pulls you there?
I like that.
Oh, like one
Derek on Discord said his solution would be to use a grappling hook and try to move the joystick to swing onto the platform. And Satchel said, click and drag the stick figure up to the shelf.
Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one.
True.
Yeah, absolutely.
The best solution to a problem is usually the easiest one.
You also have so that you could draw your own little platforms.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think these are all like pretty fantastic examples, usually because you see them a lot in modern puzzle games and ideas. Perspective and like superliminal, or maybe like the drawing idea, like in I think Kirby and the Rainbow Curse, maybe. There's a couple Kirby games like that, yeah.
Canvas Curse, Rainbow Curse.
It's
Maybe
the
being
Wii.
able to drag the platforms and resize them, almost like resizing a window.
Mhm.
Just like, but you have to do it like on the corner, like
Yeah.
a real window.
Kind of like Street Fighter versus Artist. That's his videos.
Yeah.
Anybody else has any cool puzzle ideas for that one? It's no problem. But yeah, otherwise, that's the presentation for today.
There is one other thing I want to talk about, if that's right.
Yeah,
In the stats, puzzles with sort of multiple solutions, or no true solution. If anybody's ever heard of Zachtronic Games, things like Space Chem or Infinifactory or Opus Magnum, they're pretty good games. Essentially, it is a puzzle game in that you're given a set of inputs and you can use a bunch of things like conveyor belts, things that pick up and drop off objects to combine them and attach them and all sorts of things in different ways to get the desired output. But the thing is, since it's very flexible in what it lets you do. And there's a large community just based around trying to find the most optimal solution to things. Maybe it's the one that does the fastest, or uses the least objects, or takes up the least amount of total space. And designing a puzzle for that is very difficult, but it can be really satisfying because it can appeal to a wide range of skill. Because anyone can get a solution that works, but diving deeper and getting absolutely everything you can out of each section, that can be a fun optimization task for those that want to go further. There's been a lot of actual deep dive blog posts involving actual math trying to optimize the ever living heck out of some of these. So it's really cool to see. Yeah, you can make a puzzle that has more than one solution, or even one where there's no true solution, and see how people puzzle it out. So yeah, that's all.
Another sort of puzzle, I guess, would be the Captain Toad. Maybe you could rotate the entire level.
Absolutely.
So the player can jump and then they can press the space bar again and again to jump.
Okay.
Jump.
Infinite double jump.
Things like that. It's pretty easy. I mean, the enemy's gonna work too.
And the mention of multiple solutions reminds me of, there's a chamber in Portal where they wanted to teach the player that cubes cannot go through the emancipation drill. And there's a little hole, and it's meant to look like you can push the cube through there, but they tried to shrink it down so you can't. People still have managed to squeeze it in there anyways.
I think I know what you're talking about. It's above the Emancipation Grill? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they're just like, no, stop it, you're not supposed to do that. Well, I'm gonna do it anyways.
I know in Sonic 06 and Silver's Dungeon specifically, the infamous one, where you can literally just skip the entire puzzle by just clicking through the walls.
I mean, that's just Sonic 06.
It's quite a solution.
Destiny 2 raised ours and,
That reminds me of Sonic Forces, where there's a jumping glitch.
Oh.
I can't remember everyone else, but yeah, so you can pause the screen, pause the game, and you can just jump infinitely.
Isn't that Sonic?
That's Sonic, yeah, that's Sonic Boom, yes.
Oh yeah, Sonic Boom.
That's the Knuckles glitch.
The Knuckles glitch,
Yeah,
yeah.
the infinite Knuckles jump.
Yeah, it's a shame they patched it out.